Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel room. I'm Jeanne Adams, your host. Today, we are talking about the fabulous world of Valdemar, created by the awesome author Mercedes Lackey. And we have some wonderful panelists today to help us talk about this wonderful topic. And I will ask them to each introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their first introduction to Mercedes Lackey and the world of Valdemar. JL, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Jael Gribble. I'm a urban fantasy, speculative fiction sort of author. I first started reading Valdemar when a friend of mine in junior high loaned me the books that she had. So I've been reading them for a very, very long time, and I still keep up with the series to this day. As a writer, I'm wearing my court scarlets, and I have 3 Siamese cats who are my very own sun cats. So I might be a fan.
Just a little bit. Elizabeth?
I'm Elizabeth Vaughan. I write fantasy romance novels. And I was lucky enough to participate in the Valdemar anthologies, writing short stories in Mercedes Lackey's world. I was first introduced, I think I found Arrows of the Queen in the bookstore. And it's been a love affair ever since.
Oh, that's so great. Paige?
Well, pardon me, I tripped and fell into Valdemar when I was in high school, which proves that I'm old, when the books first came out, when Arrows first came out. And I've been kind of hooked on all things Mercedes Lackey ever since, not just Valdemar, but the Diana Treguard mysteries, which I adore. And I have also, the last couple of years, been writing for the Valdemar anthologies.
Oh, that's so awesome. Unlike
so much
like
fun.
y'all, I sort of tripped into it in the bookstore. I was looking for something that was sort of like Anne McCaffrey's Harper series. And so my lovely bookstore attendant said, "Ooh, try this."
Well, and you know, when you're a horse crazy teenager and there's horses on the cover and it's fantasy and that's like the secret ingredient. It's like,
oh gosh, yes.
Just give me that.
Yeah.
What's funny is that I wasn't even into the horses. It was the griffins that grabbed me. So Black Griffin is the very first one that I read.
Okay.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I
Wow,
love
that's a great series. Yeah.
Isn't it though? And I love the way she's tied them all together. And as we said, it all starts with Arrows of the Queen, which is pretty much a YA story. Mm-hmm. And there's 3 books in that series, and it's Arrows of the Queen and Arrows Flight and Arrows Fall. And then we also, much, much later, she wrote the one that went back and told about the thief, to take a thief.
Oh, the thief, to take a thief. Yeah.
She went back and told his story. So it's interesting how she's been able to jump around in the world. One of the things that I'd love to hear y'all's opinions on is, how do you think she grew as a writer from Arrows Flight to Arrows Fall? What are your thoughts, Jael?
That's hard for me because I've read all of the books, and so it's a lot easier to talk about how she's grown as a writer from the beginning to currently.
Go ahead.
And it's pretty cool that as a writer myself, I kind of feel like I've grown up along with her, and I've always taken inspiration from her ability to write at significantly different time periods in the same world and have it be recognizably the same world, even through like multiple cataclysms.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on her growth as a writer, Elizabeth?
I think what impresses me the most is part of her ability to change in time, to go back and forth, is her use of her very subtle use of vague. One of the things you don't want to do when you're writing fantasy series is you don't want to be too specific about any one particular era or any one particular event, especially if you're referencing the past. And she's managed to use that to her advantage to write wonderful stories by jumping around. Now, I haven't read any of the current books. I think the last one I picked up, I know I've read Exile's Valor and Exile's Honor. And then I don't remember in what order they came out. I tend to snag them whenever I can find them and find time. But I know that her current books, the most recent books, are in the very founding of Valdemar. And one of the abilities that she has is to use vague references that she's written before to create even richer worlds with current books. And I've always tried to keep that in mind when I'm writing my own stuff. Vague can be your friend.
That's a great point.
Part
Paige,
of
what
the
about
power,
you?
part of the power of her work is also you can pick up a Valdemar book anywhere in the continuum and fall right into the world. And when you pick up another one, it's you're never lost. You know, sometimes you end up in a series and you've got book 5 in your hand and you haven't read the first 4 and you just end up with it. And what are you going to do? It doesn't matter where you land. Yeah, things are a little bit easier if you have some background, but you can pick up any of her books and she's going to take you on a story that makes sense. Right. And that is key. And I think the thing that I've always liked about her work is that she deals with difficult topics in a very direct way. And she doesn't glamorize the hard things, but she doesn't skim over them either. And that when you're a young reader is like in Arrows and the whole Arrows trilogy, there's some really hard things that happens there that she deals with, but you don't feel overwhelmed by them. She's able to introduce those tough topics, especially to young readers, in a way that you understand that how bad they are, but you're not overwhelmed by them. And that is a real gift in a writer. And I think that the thing I've noticed in her writing over the years is that she's able more and more and more to create emotional depth quicker and quicker as she's progressed as a writer. And I've really liked that. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think she tackled some very difficult subject in the last Harold Mage series as well.
Oh, yeah.
While still telling such a gripping and engaging story over the trilogy that you didn't feel beat over the head with it, but you couldn't step away from it either. It was an integral part of the story. Each of us have mentioned various ones along the continuum. Hannah, JL, what's your favorite trilogy or grouping?
Hands down, Last Harold Mage trilogy. Those are like my old friends' books that, I can always go back to them if and they're tragic and they're sad and I cry my eyes out every time, but it's like, it's kind of comforting in a way because I know the emotional reaction that I'm going to get. Yes. That being said, I think that my favorite, like on the adventurous side, is the Mage Storms trilogy, because I love the way that all the disparate groups are working together to solve one problem. Yes,
I like that one too. What about you, Elizabeth?
I think I really enjoy the most is Exile's Honor and Exile's Valor, and I may have them in the wrong order. Albrecht's story, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, it has always fascinated me. Someone who leaves his people and becomes, a herald with a companion, and yet still strives to protect his people, even though his people betrayed him, and certain elements of the society betrayed him. And I've always really enjoyed that story the most. Although I have to say, Last Harold Mage, man, if I need a good cry, I know which book to pick up.
Yes, absolutely. What about you, Paige?
I'm going to have to go with The Last Harold Mage as well. I mean, and I think part of it has to do with that particular story arc. There weren't a lot of people publicly telling those kind of stories about those kind of pains and tragedies at that time.
Very true.
And I think it was so groundbreaking for me as a young person that it went straight through me. And it's the one I think of when I think of her work. It's that set there. So as much as I love the others, I think that was just so enlightening for me as a very sheltered, white girl growing up in the backwoods of Maine, encountering things that I would never have encountered, publicly in that time period and where I was. It was eye-opening. And I think that's why it's so powerful for me.
Yeah. I was trying to scan through real quickly. Normally, I would have the entire shelf full behind me If
But
I
you're
were
in
at home.
Scotland, you lucky
But I'm in
woman.
Scotland, so yeah.
I printed out a list.
Oh, you are smarter than I am.
I've got the companion with me. So,
I liked the ones that were. It was the second trilogy with Talia, with the Hardorn, where they were having the battles with Hardorn, and by implication, the Empire one step waiting in the wings beyond. And that series, for some reason, is one that I go back to a lot.
Is that Wins?
Yeah, it's Mage Wins.
Yes,
Mage Wins, yeah.
yeah. And then the Foundation and Bastion and all those, I go back to those. I think she has such a gift for portraying a young man or a young woman in that stages of trying to figure out who you are, and that growth period of, and she even shows it a little bit with Albrecht, because you see his backstory as he's coming up as a young army officer. So I love that series too. I reread that series a lot. I reread all of these a lot. So.
Yeah, Carowin is my girl. I reread her a lot. By the Sword.
By the Sword. And the whole, is it Tamra and Kethy?
Yes.
Yes.
The Oathbound.
The Oathbound books. Oh, those are just fabulous.
Yeah.
And to put together a series of short stories like that carry on with character development. Oh man, I love that stuff.
Yes. Yes.
I can only hope to get to do, to accomplish that someday in the same kind of way.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that's one of the reasons I was getting at what were some of your favorites. And Paige, I want to know yours too, was because one of the things I think she's done is, by writing in all these different places but staying in the same world, she has given us all manner of different stories, but we're into it. We buy it. We pick it up because it's in Valdemar. So, Paige, what are some of your favorites?
I like the Owls trilogy.
Really?
Yeah. It's just different. It doesn't quite. I don't know. I'm not going to say this well. It comes at things from a different angle, and I like that shift of perspective. It's hard to define. I think sometimes, and this is a habit I noticed in myself as a young person, like I have a hard time letting go of characters, whether I'm writing them or reading them. And, I got really upset when I was very young and reading Narnia, and the main characters in the first couple books suddenly weren't there anymore because they'd aged out and other things were happening. I was like, where's, and I actually stopped reading them for about a decade. It took me 15 years to finish Narnia because I didn't like the change in perspective. Right. And so when I've had to let myself come to understand as a writer why that's done, and then, come in and see when that perspective comes from a totally different place, the value in that, in expanding the world and growing as a reader. And so that was the effect of the Owls trilogy for me. It wasn't what I was used to, but it was still awesome in its own way. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. And that's actually one of the reasons I like the Griffin series so much, is that even though we're jumping back in time for most of it, you do then also have the reconnection in what would be the present time of, well, guess what? Magic's real and it's bigger than you thought. And, but we go back and we see that. And I had a hard time. My brain, and the companion is funny about this, the Valdemar companion, because it makes some of the connections that I have missed. Yeah. But then I know in my brain, I'm always cataloging, oh, wait, now is this connected to the Owlknights, or is this connected to this? And the new series, the Beyond and Into the West and those, I keep trying to do that. Okay, wait, is this the precursor of that? Or is this... And that's where I think, Elizabeth, your point is well made, that vague is your friend.
Oh, vague can be your friend.
Well, and if you pick, if you pick the series up in the middle, then you get to play that game again from a different perspective. So depending on where you come at the series and where in your life you are, when you come at this series, you're going to this is the skill of a great writer, is that the books can age with you emotionally, and you're going to come at this differently at 50, at 40, at 12. It's going to mean different things to you. But the beauty of her writing is it's always going to mean something to you. There's something in the story, no matter what age you come at it and no matter where you come at it in the series. And that can't be said of a lot of writers.
Right. And I think she really tapped into, JL, you kind of alluded to this. She tapped into the fact that all of us would like a fire cat or a companion So, JL, why don't you talk a little bit about what that kind of storytelling, how that kind of storytelling with companion animals and those sort of things, has that influenced your writing at all?
I feel like it used to when I started writing. I was a lot more into like the whole animal companion sort of thing. I don't do it so much in my current series, though I definitely took a lot of inspiration from not necessarily specifically how she uses, like how her magic functions, but definitely how it exists in the world. But at the same time, like, yeah, a lot of people probably picked up the initial Arrows trilogy because Horse Girl. But I definitely, because I started reading them more chronologically, which means that I read the Griffin trilogy and then I read the last Harold Mage trilogy before I got to Arrows. I really, really wanted one of the tailordress birds. Like that was what I really wanted.
Yeah, I still find myself when I see a hawk perched on a thing, I'm like, wow, that's a big one. I'm like, nope, we're in this world. We're in this world.
Yeah, so I was never a horse girl, but like the birds were my jam. I really wanted one of those. And in my head, I was like, what birds would I have? And it always came down to, it would be either a peregrine falcon or a couple of ravens, depending on how I was feeling that day.
What about you, Elizabeth? How did you feel about the companion animals, and did that influence anything for you? Or
I was
obviously you wrote in the world, so.
Yeah, I mean, but in the area that I wrote in, I did not write about a herald or a companion, and I didn't have any magical creatures. There was a line in one of the Exile books where Albrecht is thinking, it's after the betrayal of the queen, and they're dealing with the consequences. And Albrecht has this internal thought, that some of these people got some lands down by the border with cars that were really just scrub lands with a couple sheep. And I thought, well, what if you're the wife of one of those betrayers, one of those assassins, that they want to get, they don't want a scandal, they want you out, and what would happen under those circumstances? So I didn't get a chance to write about companions, although one snuck in because it's Valdemar, right? You got to have at least one herald and one companion. But I think her influence over B has been more of her storytelling ability, how to take ordinary people and put them in extraordinary circumstances and how they respond to it. I also very much admire her use of the vague concept to build back and build forward and to keep that reader's attention. But the ability to that internal dialogue with the emotional, that kind of thing, especially in the Last Harold Mage series, that's pretty critical. And when you're writing romance, the internal dialogue about the emotions is so necessary that I think she's been a huge influence on me that way, to take that inner dialogue and develop those emotional responses that way. But I've never been that much of a horse person. They're really big. But the birds I could do, except, cats, that wouldn't work so well. So I do in my own fantasy series, I do use horses and cats, not so much birds yet, but I think that's going to work its way into any kind of fantasy novel, don't you think?
Yeah, a lot of those elements. Yeah. What about you, Paige?
Well, I cut my teeth and learned to read long series with the Black Stallion series, Walter Farley. in the 70s and 80s. And so all of my stories, through my elementary school years and on into junior high had some sort of talking horse involved. That was before I even ran into Valdemar. And so for me, that made perfect sense when I landed there. I was like, oh, yeah, of course, And so it was like coming home in a weird way. It was like, oh, other people do this too. Yay. And, as I've gotten older, I find myself, obviously, I'm much older now, but I don't have that element in my work anymore. I haven't for decades. But there's a level of connection, I think. There's a connection with animals that show up in my story, especially, fantasy creatures, horses specifically, where there's a gentleness there. There's a connection that I think comes from that, even if the horse isn't giving advice, but my characters always respect the animals that are around them in the stories. And I write epic fantasy. So there's, I'm mostly dealing with dragons more than horses these days. But I think that's comes from that. But I really do think it's that emotional resonance that Elizabeth was talking about. That that's what I crave in all the stories I read, and that's what I try to bring to what I write. And so I think running into that at a young age with the Arrows trilogy, and it was so interesting because you're watching Talia kind of unfold and grow as a person and how her thought process changes. And then you see, and as you get older, that's your author changing and growing as your character changes and grows. And once you get to a point as a writer where you realize that is a thing that happens, that it's not just the characters growing, it's the author growing. And you get to go back and examine that and study it, that becomes really exciting, and you start enjoying the story on a different level. I was an English major, and I've always found that there's 3 different ways to approach any story that you're reading. 1 is, I'm the reader and I'm enjoying the heck out of this. 2 is, thou shalt analyze the hell out of this. And 3 is, that was brilliant. How did she do that as a writer? So, yeah, and being able to switch between those can be really fun and give you new access to the stories as well. And I learned that from reading really good writers.
I find that I have to, if I want to analyze, especially with Mercedes Lackey's work, I literally have to put myself in that mindset before I open the book.
Yes.
Because otherwise I'm just sucked into the story, and that's it.
And you gotta know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You got to go in prepared.
Yes. You all know that, becoming a writer at any stage along the game changes you as a reader. You don't suspend disbelief quite as easily or as well as you might have before you started writing. But I find that she's one of those auto buys for me, because I can literally dive in and I don't analyze unless I literally specifically step back and go, like Paige said, how did she do that?
Yeah, she has us well trained.
She does. Yeah. But each book, just like you said, sucks you right in. And then you're like, wait, I was supposed to be checking for something here. But
the log has been in the dryer for 3 days. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I plan out. If I know a new one's coming out, I'm just like, okay, whatever day that drops on the doorstep, nothing is happening till it's done.
She's one of the few authors that I still, because I have the collection started, I buy in hard copy.
Me too.
I have an entire bookshelf of just her books down in my living room.
Yeah, there are certain authors that you end up doing that with. There are certain authors that all of a sudden you look around and you're like, I have this in hard copy and trade paperback and mass market, and now I have it in digital, and I hope they don't come out with another format because my bookshelf is full.
No, I don't know. Has she done any audio?
I don't do audiobooks, so I don't even know.
Yeah, neither do I.
But she has the Filk from her world. I know that you can buy those, which is also
absolutely.
Very cool.
Yes, that's so much fun.
I admire that tremendously. I tried, oh my gosh, I tried putting a song in one of my books, and oh my God, my writers group was like, what do you think you're doing? And I'm like, well, Mercedes did it. And they're like, yeah. No, I got like 2 verses in, and that was it. Because do you know how difficult that is? It's incredibly difficult.
I've tried and edited it out.
Yeah.
I think one survived in like the second book in my series, and only because it was important later, not because it actually was good.
I think I kept a ditty or something that was very short, but
very quick.
Yeah. Anything else, scrap that. But I do admire it a lot. So out of all of these stories that she has built in this world, and we've each talked about The Last Herald Mage, but is there one story that really stood out for you as something that impacted your life, or you were thinking about story structure or about portraying a character? What about you, Elizabeth? Is there one that really gripped you? And
honestly, I got to say, Last Herald Mage was my first exposure to a gay relationship. Like you, white suburban girl, never exposed to anything like that in my life. And I'm reading this book and I'm like, what? But it was so, I'm going to use the word integrity. It was so honest and so real that I found myself falling in love with the characters, even if the message I was getting back then was that this was inappropriate. And I think that did have an influence on me broadening my perspective, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. I have since turned to her for writing examples, or I'll think, oh, I remember how she did that, and I'll use that as well. But I think the emotional impact of those books is probably the most critical thing that I would point to with her writing. The other thing I wanted to mention was her other series based on, is it fairy tales?
Yes.
500 Kingdoms?
Mm-hmm.
The 500 Kingdoms. Yeah, those books. I really enjoyed, I've read like the first 4 or 5, and I really enjoyed her take on some of the elemental magic. That's it. Those elemental magic books too.
I collect those too. Those are amazing.
Good Lord. The world is every time I turn around, she's expanded out the worlds that she's writing in. Yeah. I did have 2 stories in the Elemental Masters. There were 2 anthologies that they did in there, and I enjoyed that tremendously. But I have to tell you that I set them in the Tower of London in a specific time period, and I am never, ever writing any historical anything ever again. I think I lost an entire week trying to figure out if they had screened-in windows in the Tower of London when the Duke of Wellington took over the place. I was like, no, I can't do this. I admire tremendously anybody who writes historical books, that are accurate. Oh, can't do it. No. But it was fun. Doing those 2 shorts were fun, and I enjoyed it. And I love the Tower of London, and I love the Elemental Master stuff. But oh no, never again.
What about you, Paige?
Oh God, I don't even know if I can decide. Again, I've already mentioned what The Last Herald Mage, for very much the same reasons, meant to me growing up in the backwoods of Maine and encountering things that you only ever heard whispered of in the locker room, and having that true, honest, emotional connection to broaden your world was very, very powerful to me. Outside of Valdemar, I would say it is the, oh my God, it's totally just right out of my brain. Urban fantasy magic. Oh my God.
Diana
Treeguard. Thank you. Oh my God. I'm old. Those, when I picked up Children of the Night, I was in a vampire craze. I was having my vampire kick, which meant, speaking of historical fiction, I was reading all of Chelsea Quinn Yarborough, who basically just writes incredible historical fiction and sticks a vampire in the middle of it as her foil, right? I love Quinn. But I was completely on this vampire kick, and Children of the Night, it's got to be a vampire tale. And I end up in this urban fantasy, psychic vampire, witchcraft world, and the magic system's amazing. And I was just blown away. And having come from reading the Valdemar stuff into that, it was a complete switch in her world, but she handled it so well. And I go back and reread those over and over again, right alongside Valdemar. And I wish there were more than 3 of them. And I think there's a novella, but there needs to be like 50 of those as well, because
I agree with you.
Just love those books as well. So we kind of stepped outside there, but
that's
still,
okay.
For the same reasons, the quality of the characters, the depth of the storytelling. She does those books, those 3 books in that trilogy take place in very different time periods in that character's life, but they all carry her strength and her resonance and her growth through them. And it's just incredibly powerful. And she deals, in the first, and I think it's in the second book, she's also dealing with AIDS at a time when nobody was talking about it.
Right.
Right. And so that's incredibly powerful as well, that she's willing to look around at society and one way or another put a topic into her work that's going to make you face it and think about it without it, slapping you in the face and driving you out of the story. That's a skill as well.
That's it's an extreme sport in this case. And I think she does it brilliantly. I think she was one of the very first YA authors to deal with same-sex relationships and with the AIDS thing and with, child abuse and many things like that. She's really, and like you say, she puts it in the story front and center, and she does not shy away from it, but it's not like she doesn't get up on her soapbox and preach at you, but she makes it an integral part of the story so that you learn. And I like that. I really admire it and respect it too. JL, what about you? What was a character or group of books that really, really hit you where hit you?
So Last Herald Mage, when I read that, without calling out specific ages, I think I'm like just slightly a generation behind you guys. So like once I got to the books, it wasn't like, oh my God, this exists. But at the same time, it was absolutely the first time I'd seen those characters being front and center. Right. But at the same time, reading these in high school and seeing that she had representation in so many more of the books, and it wasn't about that. It was just, these love stories also exist, and that really heavily influenced the way that I write characters in like the found family characters in my books.
Mm-hmm. For me, I think it was the Oathbound and Oathblood, with the female friendship, I'd never seen somebody write a character who was ace. And it was just, this is the character, this is who she is. And it wasn't about that. It was just, this is who this character is. And we accept her that way because in our world, that's just who she is. And I think for me, I go back because I love their friendship. And I love the fact that nothing shakes that friendship. I really have Tarma and Kethri. I really love them as characters. And stepping out of the Valdemar world, the go-to books for me, like when I need a comfort read, or as you said, a good cry, is the Outstretched Shadow, the one she wrote with James Mallory, the trilogy she wrote with the James Mallory.
Okay.
They're
forgotten about those. Isn't that awful?
Oh, they're so good. And of all the things that you can't bring a lot of stuff with you to when you go overseas to study. On my Kindle, I immediately went and got all 3 of those, the first trilogy, because I had to have them. They're my comfort reads, which I weep copiously with each book, but still a comfort read. And I do love the Diana Treeguard ones too. And I agree with you, Paige. There needs to be many, many more of those. But I guess that's one of those series like Patricia Briggs's Hurogs that's going to just wait a little while before there's another one.
And it's not so much, and the beauty of that is it's not so much that there's anything like we didn't get cliffhung. We're not waiting for something. No. It's just I love them so much. I want more.
Yeah. I love the characters.
Yeah. But as a writer, sometimes you just can't, you're not in the place to do that. So, we understand that too.
That's right.
We just love what we love.
Yes. Well, we've touched on it a little bit, but I want to go more fully into it. I know that the panel is about Valdemar, but she's obviously written innumerable worlds and created innumerable worlds. If you had a choice to write in one of her worlds, and Paige, you and Elizabeth have done that a little bit, but including all of her worlds, if you had a chance to write in one of her worlds, which one would you choose? JL?
It would probably be Valdemar, with the Elemental Masters as a very, very close second.
Yeah. For those of you who are not familiar, the Elemental Masters are set in various times during our current timeline. It's generally our world, sort of, with elemental magic.
Yeah. I think it started in Victorian.
Yeah.
Victorian times,
the very
I'm pretty
first
sure.
one is the very, well, actually, no, it would be
the first one is the Fire Rose, which
right, and that's 1906.
Which is San Francisco in 1906. But then but that's a different publisher from Serpent's Shadow, which is the first one, which is an earlier time period and set in England.
Yeah. She's jumped at, most publishers and agents will tell you, don't set things in different countries in the same, if you're doing a series, keep it in one place. She's all over the world. And I'm like, go girl, go.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Western Rodeo in Germany is my favorite one of those. And outside of context, that sounds insane, but I promise you it is one of my favorites in that series.
Yes. I really like that one too. Elizabeth, other than writing in another Valdemar anthology, is there another one of the worlds that you'd like to write in?
I'd really like to go back to Elemental Masters. If they contacted me and said, even with the challenge of the historical, there's something about taking that time period and putting in the secret magic society that I really do enjoy. And also there's the element of extraordinary gentleman kind of Victorian era adventuring and attitudes that I think would be a lot of fun to explore. And I really, other than that, though, my heart does belong to Valdemar. The writing about, I created a little piece of land called Sandbriar, and I really enjoyed telling the stories that I could tell for those characters.
I will say the Sandbriar stories are some of my favorites out of those anthologies. So thank you for writing those.
And I appreciate that. I think I've taken, there's only so far you can take a series of short stories, and I think I've kind of wound everything up and finished it off. And honestly, those anthologies are opportunities for other writers to, write legitimate fanfic and get exposed to other readers who might then be pulled to their work. Mm-hmm. And I've kind of had my shot at somebody else's turn. But they could probably lure me back with the Elemental Master stuff. I really do enjoy those books.
Yeah.
Not the historical aspect.
Yeah. Just not the Tower of London, right?
Not
my
the Tower
God.
of London.
Screened in windows.
I don't know. I love Elemental Masters, but I don't know that I could write there because I am so scatterbrained that the idea of actually sticking to the research it would require to do it justice terrifies me. I have friends who write that kind of stuff. I'm like, I'm going to go over here and make up stuff. Okay. It only has to make sense in my brain. But yeah, I love writing in the Valdemar world. I've only had the opportunity for a couple of years, and it's been challenging because honestly, it's a stylistic shift for me. It's outside of the way I write. It's a different language. It's a different sentence structure. It's very different from what I normally write. So I'm like, are people going to read this and like my stuff and then come read my stuff and go, what was she doing? I don't know. But I love the world so much that it would be hard for me to leave right now because I'm still exploring it. But again, it would be the Diana Treguard mysteries. I would like to move outside the regular characters and kind of have somebody as watching this unfold, but not really understanding it. I think, as this, I don't know, that would be fun. And even in the Valdemar books, I'm writing I'm not writing companions and heralds. I'm writing a young girl who grows up in Sweet Springs, which is the first village that Talia rides through, and she grows up under the shadow of this is where Talia appeared, and she wants to be, pardon me, I've got a cat. She wants to be a herald, but it turns out that she's not chosen, and she ends up in these circumstances where she ends up wanting to be a guard and wear the blue instead of the white. And I haven't seen a lot of that done, with Valdemar. So I'm still exploring what does it mean to be, highly trained in that world, but not part of the absolute elite per se.
Right.
Right. And how does that change your perspective on things? So I'm still playing with that. And I think it would take a lot to tear me away from that right now, because I'm having fun with it.
So when you talked about the difference of writing in Valdemar, one of the things that's very different is the punctuation.
Yes.
For companions, for someone who isn't familiar with the world, companions, the spirit horses that are linked to the heralds, when they talk, it's always in italics, and it starts with a colon and ends with a colon. And it's just a way of letting you know that the talking horse is talking. Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's all the telepathy, mind speaking in her world.
Yes, all the mind speaking is usually done that way. But so at one point I got copy edits back on a story that had a companion that had like maybe 2 lines. I mean, it was not extensive. And I opened it up, and the copy editor had removed the italics. So I contacted the editor and I said, have you guys changed something that I didn't know about? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, look at the companion's dialogue. And he goes, delete that. We'll get you another one. Apparently nobody had told the copy editor about. I don't know whether that's actually true or not, but the next version of my copy edits that I got had the correct.
That's funny.
Oh my gosh, style sheets, people.
Yeah,
but it's something that somebody who's been reading Valdemar for years doesn't even think about.
Right.
But when you go in to do copy edits and stuff, you have to be conscious of. And in my most recent story, I had a reference to Chiras, the pack animals that are occasionally referenced in the Valdemar world, and Chiras is always italicized, which I had not realized. And I also referenced baby Chiras, and I said, I want to name them. Nobody's named them yet. I want to call them Chirps or Cheeps. And my editor said, well, that's up to Ms. Lackey. I said, oh, okay. So when I got the approved version back, I was like, did it survive? And it did. It survived.
Yay! Creating canon. I love it.
My contribution to canon. But oh my God, it's so much fun to do that, to step into another world. I don't know that I'd want to do it for a full novel,
right?
But for short stories, it's a blast, I gotta say. And Paige, I'm sure you're the same way.
Yeah, I think too much of me would creep in a full novel. I think, and my voice is so distinctly different from hers overall that I think it would be a disaster. So, yeah, I don't even know what to say about that beyond ooh. But it's so much fun, and it's a challenge. You get your own rhythm, and you find your own voice as a writer, and you get into that, and then somebody's like, why don't you try this? And I'm like, that sounds hard. I think I'll do it. So
I think that's awesome. Honestly, if I couldn't, I'd love to write in the time period with Mags and the closer to home period. I'd love to do that. But I'd also love to write in the world she created with the Breakthrough, Elite, and Apex, and Hunter. I guess it starts with Hunter. I'd love to write in that world, and the Joust world too, which is again a completely different world.
Yeah, very different.
And each of those, I so admire the fact that with each of those, she's created a completely different magic system.
And then, like the one that nobody talks about, like that I just found randomly and bought them all on ebook, like the reborn like Knights of the Round Table at the weird private school. Like it was a really like short YA series.
I don't know this.
I don't even remember the titles offhand.
Is that the Serrated Edge? That's the Serrated Edge.
Completely, Serrated Edge is the elves with race cars.
Oh, yes. Oh, now I'm
there's so many. They all start to run together.
Yeah.
I mean, I could only dream of being that prolific.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that awesome?
And to be that prolific and that consistent in the quality of what you're producing, extra amazing.
Extra amazing. And that, I think that's one of the reasons that she has been so highly touted, but also so constant through as a seller, is that she is consistent. The quality is always consistent. I think she's never been one that said, no, I don't need an editor any longer.
Thank goodness.
And then there was the fairy tales too, the Firebird, and those were super good. And you've got the list, JL.
I just have the list of Valdemar. Like I didn't
see?
print out the rest of them. If I was downstairs, I could go to my bookshelf. But
yeah, and of course the Google only gives you a few, but at a time. But anyway, yeah, I do remember those, JL, but I had forgotten, now that you mention them, but I had forgotten them completely. And the House of the Winds, I'm hoping she'll continue that one too.
Yeah.
That was sort of a standalone so far, but it seemed like it was cool.
So much out there.
The funny thing is that when the Foundation series, Mag's first set, which was 5 books, which I was like, oh my God. The funny thing is that by the time I got through those, I was like, I am so done with Mags. Like, I still love the world, but I'm so done with him. So then when the Closer to Home trilogy started coming out, I was like, oh my God, more Mags. But I loved that we got a very different Mags because he'd grown up, but it was still recognizably the same character. And I think that that's just, and so that kind of like sucked me back in, and I loved that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, but I sort of agree with you that by the time we were done with it, I'm like, okay, moving on now.
And even, at that point, she's literally dozens of books deep into this world, but she's still finding new ways to put new spins on things, like how Mag's wife ends up becoming a herald. And taking over from her dad without it being like as epically, like it could have just been epically tragic, and they could have done the Monarch's Own the way it's supposed to be, but she still found a new way to put, a new spin on her own world, which was really impressive.
And it's not like she shies away from the tragic. I mean, when we lose the king, we lose the heralds, we lose all these people, and it's like,
we lose the companions.
Yeah.
I mean,
that'll break your heart. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I think though that's one of the reasons that Take a Thief, Skiff's book, because we meet Skiff in Heiress of the Queen, and it was books and books and books before
we came back to him. Yeah,
we came back to him, and we get his early life, and it's tragic.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a for hanky read.
Yeah.
And then even though we technically know the ending to that book, because it's a completely different perspective, and because of how well she wrote this new character in the same situation, like I didn't feel let down by the ending, even though technically you know what happens.
Yeah, that's the mark of a great storyteller, is to take a story that is known and that you know what's coming, the ending, like the Titanic sinks, right? But at the time that movie came out, who didn't have a sob fest through the whole damn thing, even though you knew how it was going to end? Hello,
That was my worst birthday ever. I saw it on my birthday, and
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But when you have that skill of storytelling and you're so invested in the characters, it doesn't matter whether the ending is good, bad, or whatever it's going to be. Right. If the author has that skill and talent, you're just invested and you're in, and she does that so well. There's very few authors anymore, because my bookshelves are, well, we won't talk about that. That I will, when the book is coming out, it's on pre-order. Period.
Yeah.
End of statement.
Yep.
She is one. And the other one ongoing forever and ever is Janny Wirtz, because she's a bloody genius.
My other one is Ilona Andrews.
Yeah, me
yeah,
too.
they're good.
And Nalini Singh.
But there are some out there that, you just, once you're committed to their style, and you can trust them. And that's the thing about Mercedes that I think is important as a reader, is you can trust that the story is going to be good, the writing is going to be solid, the characters are going to suck you in, you're going to end up in a different place, and you're in for the ride and you're committed. But when you find an author you can trust to deliver, and that's also something she's done forever and ever. She has earned the trust of her readers.
Another example of a book where you know how the story ends is Burning Brightly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh my God.
Yeah, you know where it's going before it even starts, and yet once again you're completely sucked in.
And that's another one that she does another twist on what you think you know about how heralds and companions work.
Yeah. And I was worried she was going to do that in Exile's Honor. Elizabeth, you were mentioning the Albrecht books. I was afraid she was going to do some sort of brightly burning twist, and we would end up with some issue with Albrecht at the end. And I was like, no, please don't do that. I love it. But of course she didn't. These are spoilers, people. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, and I'm gonna say this and try not to spoil it. But it's only in one book where the whole reincarnation bit is ever really called out.
Right.
But you get hints of it in terms of the very similar names between Faniel's aunt and Carowin's companion. And so it's like those little things that if you know what to look for will kind of jump out at you and you go like that. But I love that she only ever really kind of references it once.
She's the queen of Easter eggs.
Yes.
She is. She is, absolutely. But I think that goes back to what Elizabeth said earlier about she absolutely deliberately Easter eggs, but I also think that some of it, especially in the early books, were vague as your friend.
Mm-hmm.
And then now she's gone back so many books in that she just Easter eggs all over the place.
Yeah. And I think that's a delight to a reader when you find an Easter egg because you've read prior books, or when you find the book and pick it up for the first time and go read others and realize it was an Easter egg, that just pulls the reader in even more. I'll never forget that line, "Feet belong on the ground." And I was what?
I remember there was one, I think it's that one that you're referencing, JL, where I literally tore upstairs to the bookcase where all the books are and went, flipping through. It's an Easter egg, yes. Got it.
And I think I've seen writers who have grown up on her learning to do that a little bit themselves.
Oh,
which is
I am like
super fun.
That's like my goal is to do little things like that. And
I don't know I'm going to get there.
Blatantly my inspiration. I've met her once. It was the FanX Salt Lake. And I brought my copy of Magic's Pawn because that's the one that I wanted signed, obviously. And the day that I met her was actually the release day of one of my books. And I got to tell her that, I am where I am now because of your writing. And she was so sweet about it. So that was very cool.
She was actually the very first writer I ever wrote to and asked for writing advice.
Oh, wow.
I actually framed it, and it's a little piece of paper that has the dot printer little edges on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically says the best way to be a writer is to write a lot and just keep writing and don't give up. Misty.
Nice.
And it's here. I brought it with me.
Yay!
So and I got to meet her at RavenCon a couple of years ago and be a fangirl and squee and say how much I enjoy her work. But
I met her briefly at Dragon Con several years ago, and there was fangirling. And I don't fangirl very often, but boy,
me either.
that was embarrassing.
Well, I know her from her attendance at Gen Con for many years. And I consider myself very lucky every time I got to sit down and talk with her. It's been just pure pleasure writing for the anthologies, that's for sure.
And she's so generous. She's so generous to like let somebody like me who nobody's ever heard of, to be honest, write in her world, you know?
Absolutely.
And she trusts John, and John gets the word about somebody or meets somebody and goes to her and says, hey, I think this would be a fit. And if she agrees, then you've got an opportunity it's just stunning. And that kind of generosity in an author of her caliber and her fame is just, it's remarkable.
It's really awesome.
And I truly
it's also
appreciate
rare.
it. It's incredibly rare. But she's just kind. You know, I have a friend who, and Jeannie, you know Darren Kennedy.
Yes.
Darren Kennedy tells a wonderful story about he was starting his first trilogy, his chess books. And he met her somewhere, I forget where, and was telling her about these books. And she sat down and talked chess with him for like an hour and a half.
Oh my gosh, how wonderful.
I'm like, okay, if you have to consider this, if it's a chess game, you have to consider this. And what about that? And they did this whole thing that like all ended up in his chess trilogy, which is astounding. And, you know, and he tells that story and he just glows when he tells it. He just glows, you know.
That's awesome.
That just seems to be, I haven't had that kind of conversation with her. I've just, you know, met her briefly, but that seems to be very much who she is. And I find that fantastic.
Yeah, I do too. We've lost JL. I hope she'll pop back in so we can, because we have run through our time. This has been so much fun.
Oh my God, we could probably go for another 2 hours. Oh
my gosh, it's so good. Because, you know, there's so many, we kept it to Valdemar because there's so many things she's written that are so good. Let's each of you, if you would, say where people can find you on the web. And if you have something new coming out, give it a shout out. So let's start with you, Elizabeth.
Well, I'm working on a new series and I don't have a release date yet, but you can find out more information at writeandrepeat.com. Writing like a book.
That's
fabulous.
Great. And are you on social media anywhere where we can find you?
I am on Facebook, but I really don't do any other social media. I'm kind of old school.
Can we find you as Elizabeth Vaughan on Facebook?
Yeah, Elizabeth Vaughan.
Okay.
Is she back? I think she's coming back.
Yes, she's back. Yay!
On one of the other computers on this desk because my actual one crashed.
Oh no!
I was
technology is wonderful when it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have crappernet, so I'm amazed I got through this. So I feel for you.
Well, JL, at the risk of losing you again, let's let you go ahead and say where we can find you on the web and what your newest, latest book may be. If you want to give it a shout out, or just tell us where you can find it. We can find you.
Okay, sorry, I don't have video anymore, but at least I have audio. Again, my name's Jeanne Gribble. I write under Jeanne Gribble. My current book series is The Steel Empires, which the 6th book just came out last summer. I'm currently working on the 7th and finale. The first one is Steel Victory, and you can find all about it and all of my social media stuff at jlgribble.com. Thank you so much for having me. This was amazing.
Absolutely. So glad to have you. Paige, what about you?
Well, I am Paige L. Christie everywhere, and the L is there because I have 2 first names and people always reverse them. So I've been called Christie Paige my whole life, but it is Paige L. Christie. I am currently working on the paper edits of the last book in the Legacies of Arnon series, which is behind me on the screen. And hopefully that will be out by the end of the year. It's about 2 years late because there was a panini. And I run a soup kitchen, so I've been a little busy. But the first book is, on this side, Dragon Weather. And you can pick that up pretty much anywhere books are found. And I am Paige L. Christie on all places where I am on the web. So
most excellent. And I'm Jeanne Adams, and you can find me at jeanneadams.com. And you can find me on most social media, including and more often on the Hive and Scum and Villainy known as Twitter. And you can also find me here on ConTinual. So thank you to my wonderful panelists. Thank you all for watching the panel rooms, and we'll see you again on ConTinual.
And keep the pictures coming from Scotland.
I will do that.